الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه. Listen to us talk about Zakat, inshallah. This is a follow-up session to what we had last week. We ran out of time, and mashallah, there was a number of questions that came up near the end, so we figured it would be a good idea to give you a whole session that's focused on answering your questions, inshallah. I have the honor and pleasure of giving this talk with Sheikh Aarij, who is all our teachers, and he's teacher to all of us, inshallah, and he's running a bit late, so I will kick us off. Inshallah, he'll be joining us and he'll be able to address some of the questions as well. And we'll be going until Asr prayer. Asr prayer is 5:15, and I ask you to just remember us in your dua. It is such a pleasure, such a joy to serve you, as Allah is our witness, and we look for many ways and as many ways as possible to empower you and to make you the best that you can, and this is the intent behind this lecture today. So if this clicker works, because we know it doesn't work from Sheikh Adnan, and he's right, it's not working. If you can go to the second slide, Abdullah, please. There's two items that we're going to cover. The first one is a review of what we did last week, and we're going to go very, very briefly, because I'm assuming many people were here last week, but if you weren't, it was recorded. So we will cover a recap, and then the second portion will be the Q&A, and that hopefully will take most of the discussion today. So if we can go to slide 3, Abdullah, if you don't mind. And the recap, what we talked about last time was we started by talking about what is Zakat. And Zakat is many things. One, it's a way by which you can purify your wealth. And why would you purify your wealth? Because no matter what you do, there's always going to be an element of improper things that happen to it. And I love this concept because Islam is realistic. Islam is practical. It's not 1 and 0. I know sometimes we say we want to be 100%, 1,000,000% halal. Of course we do. And that's how we all need to live our lives. But we understand that practically speaking, that is not going to always be possible. So if it's not always possible to be 100% halal, what do? Allah introduces these mechanisms by which we can move towards the halal and purify through zakat our wealth. So that's one concept behind zakat. The other concept is to ensure that wealth is not concentrated in one area, i.e. the rich have wealth and the poor don't have wealth. It's completely fine in Islam. Actually, it's encouraged, and I will argue near the end of this talk that this is how the system is set up. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to be rich. He wants you to be very successful financially, but in a way that doesn't hoard wealth and doesn't give you an advantage, an improper advantage over everybody else. So how do we remove the barriers? By introducing zakat into the process. It's also a way by which we can help the needy, those that are poor, those who are destitute, those who are in debt and will never come out of debt without outside assistance. So zakat does all of that. And who must pay zakat? Every single Muslim. But there's a few more criteria on top of that. That Muslim has to be of the age of adulthood, so 13, 14, whatever that age happens to be. And they need to be a free Muslim. Obviously, this doesn't apply as much, but at the time of the Prophet ﷺ and after, there were people who were Muslim but were captives, they were slaves. They did not have to pay zakat. But if you're free, you're a Muslim, you're a baligh, you reach the age of puberty, then you have to pay it. And there's two other items that need to happen. A, you have to have a minimum net worth. This is the Arabic word, the fancy word of nisab. Nisab is basically a minimum net worth that you have to have. And the second condition is a time limitation, and that's that 1 year lunar calendar year has to have passed for you to calculate your zakat. So the two things is minimum net worth, which is nisab. Second one is what we call hawl, which is an entire year. And be careful that it's not a solar year. So you can't say every December I'm going to calculate my zakat, or every June 1st. That will not work in Islam because there's 11 days difference. You may say, oh, no big deal. Yeah, no big deal in 1 year, but fast forward a decade and then it is a big deal because you're half the year off. So if those two things happen, then you would start calculating the zakat. How you would pay it and how much it would be is something we're going to discuss very quickly before we open up the Q&A. But those are the two conditions. So what is the minimum net worth? There's a difference of opinion among scholars. There's a gold limit and a silver limit. So about 85 grams of gold would be the minimum requirement in one school of thought, and that would equate to about $11,000. And obviously it changes because the price of gold changes all the time, although the quantity doesn't change. It's around 85 grams. The silver limit is about 615 grams, which translates to just over $1,100. So no surprise, scholars, Muslim scholars, prefer that we use the silver standard, not the gold standard, because many more people have $1,000 than $12,000 of savings, which means more people will be participating in the zakat payment system and hence the zakat receiving system. So we're not going to limit it to one standard versus the other. It's up to you. But the way I look at it is we all know, are we in need or are we having more than we need? And it's all relative, I understand. And I used this example last week, that put yourself in one of two buckets. You're either a person who may be able to pay zakat, and inshallah you're encouraged to pay zakat, or you're a person who can't and hence in need of zakat funds. So you put yourself in whichever corner, and obviously we have the limits there, but I would rather, and I hope to believe that many of us here, inshallah, have the fortitude to be able to pay zakat, even for amongst us who are students, and you may say, I don't have a lot of money. That's fine. We're going to tell you how you're going to calculate zakat in a second. But being in the bucket of being able to pay zakat, inshallah, it puts you in a position of strength. How do we calculate zakat? There's various assets. So you may have cash, you may have real estate, you may have a business, you may have stocks and RSPs and TFSAs. And all of that has different ways of calculating zakat. I know it gets very overwhelming, but inshallah, there's just like 4 or 5 that apply to most of us, if not 1 or 2. And once we explain it, you'll be empowered to know how to do it, inshallah, moving forward. So the first one is cash, or cash equivalents. So I include in that things like cryptocurrency and anything that could be seen as currency. Whether we can invest in cryptocurrency or not is a separate issue. That's a different lecture that I'm happy to give you later. But if you happen to be sitting on crypto, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ripple, whatever, Dogecoin, if you happen to have those, if you happen to have cash in any denomination, in any currency, if you have anything that's as liquid as cash, that would be the first bucket. How do you calculate zakat on that? It's simple. You take 2.5% of that amount. So basically, the way to think about it is 1/40th. How do we get 1/40th? You take the cash amount that you have, split it. I'm going to explain it this way so I can show you how very easy Islam is. It's not complicated, it's not hard, it's actually not punitive. So take your cash that you have, all that amount, whether it's $100 or $100 million, and put it into 10 components. So 10 equal components. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't say, okay, give me one of the 10 and you keep the 9. He could have easily done that, but he probably knew that many of us would find excuses and would not do it and would be punished for doing it, for not doing it. So out of his easiness and his rahmah and his mercy, he goes, okay, see that one bucket out of 10? Take that and divide it by 4 pieces, and then give me just one of those 4 pieces. So it's a very tiny amount that you're asked to pay. I know we get worried sometimes and you think, oh my God, I need this wealth. Don't worry. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you much, much more than you have given him. And this is by the prophetic hadith of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he says, money will decrease for many, many different reasons. Many reasons exist that will make your money deplete. Sadaqah, zakat, is not one of them. It will never be one of them. Never was, never is, never will be. We just need to believe that. So that's how you would do it for cash and equivalents. Now, some people ask, well, I'm getting money, let's say I'm a business person or I'm employed and I'm getting money every month or every 2 weeks or every quarter. how do I keep track of that 12-month lunar calendar? I explained that you could do it one of two ways. I'm just going to cut to the chase and tell you the easiest way that you should choose, that I personally choose and I recommend many people use, is pick a date on the lunar calendar. Let's say it's Ramadan 15 or Ramadan 27 or Dhul Hijjah or Rabi' al-Awwal. Whatever date you want, it's up to you. Allah gave you that ability to choose. But once you choose it, that's the day when you say, okay, that's when zakat is payable on me. On that day, let's say it's the 21st of Ramadan, you open up all your bank accounts. So checking, savings, the various, if you have one at Bank A and Bank B and Bank C, get a total of how much cash I have. And once you have that cash amount, you multiply by 2.5%. Now, we do recognize that maybe some of that money just came in last week. So only sat in the account for a week, no problem. If you continue to do this process, sometimes you pay on certain monies cash zakat early, sometimes late, but it balances out over time. So the simple process, pick a date, open up your bank accounts, tally up how much you have, multiply it by 0.025, and that's the zakat that you pay on cash. Very simple, cryptocurrencies involved in that. If you have currencies, let's say in other other currencies, you would add them in there. And you can do a CAD equivalent. So let's say I have US dollars and Canadian dollars and dirhams from Emirat, for example. You can tally it up, go to xe.com, get the Canadian equivalent, and pay your zakat in Canadian equivalent. You don't have to pay from the various currencies that you have. That's how you do cash. That applies to most of us. That's why He spent time on that. And Allah made it the easiest to calculate. So you don't need any scholar or any complicated advisor to help you. There are many calculators that I'll refer to at the end, but it's very simple for you to do. Second thing would be the commodities that you have. So we're talking, I don't know how Sheikh Adnan does like 17 lectures a day when he's fasting. You can't talk after a while. May Allah bless him, inshallah. Gold, silver, these things back then were considered currency, and even if it's not currency, even now we're not using it as currency, it would apply, zakat would apply on them. Now I'll explain 2 points very quickly. One is, how do you calculate zakat? You take the weight of gold, or you get a market value of that gold that you have or that silver that you have, and like cash, you pay 2.5%. Very simple. The exception is for our sisters, because our brothers can't really wear gold for jewelry. I can't speak. I can't even, subhanAllah, I need water. Can somebody get me water? No, don't get me water. So your jewelry, and we can't wear it, sisters can, so they usually have a lot of it. And if you have a lot of jewelry, if the intention is that you're gonna wear it as an ornament to beautify yourself with it, some madhab, Shafi'i madhab, says you don't have to pay any zakat on it. If you follow the Shafi'i opinion, and it's jewelry that you wear from time to time, then you could exclude it from your zakat calculation. If you follow the Hanafi madhab, for example, you would not exclude it. You would still pay 2.5% on it. Why? Because that has value. Even if you have a nice gold ring that costs $10,000, you could eventually in the future turn it into cash and do what you want with it. So it's a store of wealth. The condition, however, it's very hard to say, yeah, it's jewelry, but you know, it's in a safe box, it's been there for 10 years, I've never worn it once. It's tough to argue that this is being used for jewelry. So if you're gonna take that opinion, please wear it. I tell my wife, please go wear it as much as you can. That way, we don't have to get into calculation of zakat, which could be very, I don't even know how I'd go about doing that. I'd have to take it to a jeweler, pay them some money, get a valuation, and it's just a headache. So that's how you do it on gold and silver. Now, when it comes to business assets, so let's say you have a business, you sell pizza, or you have a bakery, or you sell computer products, whatever you do. How do you pay zakat on that? you have to pay zakat, but not on capital. And at the very, very end, I will walk you through how majestic this system is. SubhanAllah, if you spend time in finance and conventional finance like I've done, and then look at the Islamic system, you can look at both and say, La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah. You understand how Allah built a system with an intended consequence, and that consequence is rahmah for you. That's all it is. We'll get to that at the very end, but basically the way you do it on business assets is capital, productive assets, 0 zakat. There's hikmah in that. 0 on productive assets, which is long-term assets we call, or in Arabic it's called usul. On the usul you have no zakat to pay. On things like the cash of the business, so practical example, if I have a pizza shop, my oven, my equipment, my material, my tables and chairs that I serve my customers with, all of that would be considered capital. Because when I get an oven, the intention is not to sell the oven for money. The oven is there to make pizza, and I sell the pizza for money. That's how you distinguish between the two. Now, my business, that pizza shop, also has a bank account and has money in that bank account. That would not be considered long-term capital. That would be considered short-term capital. What else do I have? I have inventory. I have a whole bunch of pizzas that I've made and I've stored in the fridge. So when Wellness calls up and says, I need 100 pizzas on the 27th night, I can make them all at once. That inventory, I can see nobody's laughing, that's fine, but that inventory is not considered long-term capital. So you have to pay zakat on that. You have to pay zakat on the cash. You have to pay zakat on the account receivables. What's that fancy word? Well, let's say I have a business, I go to Fawaz, I sell them 100 computers. Typically in the wholesale business, I wouldn't get paid day one. If I go to Apple store and buy a phone, they will not let me walk out the store without me paying for it. But in the world of business, they give you 30 days, 60 days, 90 days to pay. So that's what we considered accounts payable and accounts receivable. So what you would do is you split your assets into 2 portions: long-term assets, 0 zakat; short-term assets, 2.5%. That's for business assets. Now, stocks and mutual funds, pension funds, how do we do on investments? How do we do zakat on that? Very similarly. So remember that pizza shop that I owned, it could be $1 million worth, and I do the calculation myself. What about the IBM stock that I own, or Apple, or Google, or what have you? You take that one company, Google, let's say I own one stock, and you would look through to their balance sheet, which they have to make public 4 times a year, and then you take their most recent annual statement, because they issue annual and quarterly statements, but take their annual statement and just ascertain how much of their asset base is short-term, how much of it is long-term. So let's say it's 20% short-term, 80% long-term, just hypothetically. And I'm investing $100 in Google, because one share is $100, let's say, for hypothetical purposes. So you would not take $100 times 2.5%. You wouldn't do it this way. You would take 100 times 0.2 times 2.5%. Why 0.2? Because that's the short-term assets of Google as determined by your calculation. 80% of Google's assets are non-zakatable. So you only pay on the short-term assets. Some people say, how do I do that? Like, I'm not a finance expert, I'm not an accountant. So there's one of 2 ways to do that. You could get somebody to help you, or you could approximate. It depends on how, I guess, OCD we are. If you want to be very exact, you'd have to do the calculation for every position that you have. If you have somebody who knows what they're doing, they probably can do it very, very quickly, especially if you own 2 or 3 positions. If you own 50, 60, 70, it becomes cumbersome, but it's absolutely doable. If you don't want to do that, then you would pick an approximate amount. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Our teacher's here, so I can stop talking and give him the mic and he will continue. We're just doing a quick recap. If Allah yabarak fik. So that's how you do it for your investments. You would split it, and scholars said pick an approximation if you don't want to do the number yourself. What's the approximation? I've heard various numbers. I did a presentation to MJA in the US, and I believe they picked 0.3 as a standard blanket. I believe I've seen scholars use 0.25. I tend to be very cautious, super risk averse. So when I give the advice, I'd say 0.4%, which is 1% basically. Around 1%, if you give that much, 1% instead of 2.5, you should be on the safe side. And why am I saying 0.4, other scholars say 0, I'm not a scholar, by the way, he's the scholar, but why do other opinions exist that are 0.25 and 0.3? Because they're approximating. I have real data because we actually go in and create Zakat files for individuals, and we see hundreds, if not thousands of transactions, and I feel uncomfortable with a 0.25, 0.3, because the real-time data that we have is closer, it's more than 0.3, 0.35 sometimes, depending on the company. Obviously, Air Canada is very different than Meta, but to be extra cautious, I think 0.4 would work. So you take your stock, you take the value of it, multiply by 0.4, multiply by 2.5%, and you're done. Do you want to talk about real estate, how you give zakat on real estate, various personal use assets and investments, and then debts, deducting them and not, and then maybe the last thing is who do you give zakat to, and then we'll open up Q&A.
You can continue about all the assets, and then I can talk about the who's Ahl Zakat.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's like
okay.
a flowing conversation.
طيب. Okay. Jazakallah khair. Before we get into real estate, which is the next item, remember that you sometimes have accounts that are things like RRSPs and TFSAs and RESPs. If you don't know what those are, don't worry about it. If you know what those are, you recognize that those are tax sheltered or tax-free accounts. So some people make the argument that in my RRSP, let's say I have $100,000 in my RRSP. If I pull the $100,000 day one, guess what's going to happen? Half of it's going to go away to taxes, and I'm going to get to keep $50,000. That's how the taxation works. So the argument is don't pay zakat on the entire 100, and let's say the 100 is sitting in cash. We're not using the example of stocks and so on. Well, we're going to make it super simple. If you have $100,000 in cash in an RSP, only pay zakat on $50,000. I respect that opinion. I disagree with it. And the reason why I disagree with it, and I respect it ala rasi from min fawq, the reason why I would say that is because most people, and we see it in the field, most people don't liquidate their RSPs at one time. Obviously, in emergencies, you have to. La samahullah, your child is sick, there's a reason, you cash it out, and it is what it is. But for the vast majority of us, we don't do that. So we will never really experience a 50% holdback from the government. Theoretically, it could happen, but it never really does. In fact, what people like us do, dressed in cheap suits, is talk to you about lowering your tax rate even down to 0 if possible. So you could pull money out of an RSP. There are techniques to do it where your eventual tax rate will be 0. So holding back 50% would not be fair because A, it's unlikely to happen, and B, you don't even know what the future tax rate will be. It's majhul, so why apply something that you don't know what it's going to be? And the third reason is even if you knew with certainty it will be 50%, then I would argue then take 50% of the 100,000, put it in a separate RSP account, don't invest it, don't touch it, leave it there for cash for the next 10 years, because that's the government's money. But who would do that? Nobody would do that. They say, why would I sit on $50 or $5,000, whatever the amount is, in cash when I can invest the entire thing? So we say, subhanAllah, that's right. You want to invest the whole thing. You do control the whole thing. You are benefiting from all of it. But when it comes to zakat, you want to hold back on half of it. Allahu A'lam, my humble opinion, and that of my scholars, of course, is that you pay zakat on everything. Recognizing you will be paying more, absolutely, you are paying more, but you will not outdo Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala recognizes that you're paying more, and He's going to shower you with His love, His mercy, His barakah. Your kids will start listening to you. Sheikh Adnan won't yell at you when the clicker doesn't work. You'll see the barakah in your life if you pay more. Last thing before we move to real estate and debt, and then I'll pass it on to Sheikhi, is if you have a pension, however, a pension is like CPP, Canada Pension Plan. Each one of us, if we contribute into the CPP, they take money from you, from your salary, put it away, and actually invest it for you. Do you have to pay zakat on that money? No. Scholars say you don't. Why? Because it's not under your control. You don't own it. It's earmarked for you in the future, but la samahullah, you get hit by a bus tomorrow, that money is not going to be given to your heirs. It's not part of your estate. It's just hypothetically sitting there for you. It's a promise if certain things happen. So that's why, because you're not seen as the direct beneficial owner, you don't control it, you don't pay zakat on it. There are things like liras where you do own it, but you can't access the funds. You should be paying zakat on that, but if you have that specific questions, we'll talk about it later. Finally, real estate and debts. If you have a whole bunch of real estate, if you have 2 cottages, a house in Pakistan, 2 homes here, if they're all personal use, 0 zakat on it. If it's your personal use items, that you have a cottage you go to in the summer, and when you travel back home, you have a house waiting for you, no zakat outstanding on those. The zakat is outstanding on investment assets, investment real estate. How do you pay zakat on investment real estate? You take the return that comes in, the rental, typically it's rental income. That is subject to zakat after a year of it being in your possession. So money comes in, you have it, you collected $20,000 of rent, and then it sits in your account, you would have to pay 2.5% on that, wallahu alam. Lastly, debts and loans. If you are about to pay zakat, you would deduct the loans that are outstanding now. Let's say I owe Fawaz $10,000 and I'm about to sit and calculate my zakat right now, and it's due to him now. He didn't say, take it and pay me back in 10 years. That would not be considered due now. I would pay him $10,000, then I would calculate my zakat outstanding. So I have to deduct those loans. Interestingly enough, you do have to pay zakat on money you lent out. So if, in this case, Fawaz lent me $10,000 and he says, pay me back in 2 years, guess what? He has to pay zakat on that money every year for the next 2 years, as if it's sitting in cash in his account. There's hikmah in that. We don't have time to get into it now. If you do ask the question, we'll talk about why. The only time he does not have to pay zakat on loans he gave to people is when he has given up on the hope of getting it back. If I'm a deadbeat, he gave it to me, there's no way I'm going to pay him back, maybe I don't have the ability or the willingness or what have you, then he no longer has to pay zakat on it. The moment I become rich and I'm able to pay him back, that's when the zakat calculation starts again. That's it for debts and loans at a high level. I'll pass it on to Sheikh Aarij to talk about the 8 categories of paying zakat and where you should pay zakat. We'll end with a high level piece about the philosophy of zakat and then open up for Q&A.
I found that exhilarating, by the way, mashallah. Amazing. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So the recipients of zakat are in Surah Tawbah, Surah number 9, ayah 60. إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين والعاملين عليها. This is the ayah that determines who can receive zakat. Zakat is to be given to, number 1, fuqara. These are the people who are extremely poor or broke, according to the majority of scholars. This is defined as someone who meets up to 50% of their daily needs, okay, according to the jumhur, meaning that if they need $100 to survive, they have between 0 to 50. Okay? This is a faqir, extremely poor or broke. Wal masakin, masakin is a miskin, that is someone who is not doing so well, needs help, and that is defined as someone who has 50% to 100% of their needs. So just a tier above. Even someone who is making ends meet, but they're living, paycheck to paycheck, hand to mouth, according to the fuqaha, this is a miskin who is zakat eligible, and the evidence for that is in Surah Kahf. أما السفينة فكانت لمساكين يعملون في البحر. Right, the description of the people who owned a ship and they had a job, they would fish in the water. They are described in the Quran, despite having a job and having a ship, as Masakeen. Okay, so that's number two, faqir and miskin, the levels of people who are poor. Number three, wal amilin alayha, a employee of the Muslim state that is administering zakat. So they're collecting it, they're distributing it. I carefully translated it as the employee of a Muslim state, not someone who works for a corporation or a charity that collects zakat, because the intent of the ayah originally was the state would employ people, not individual entities and corporations. Today we have that. This is like, there's some like people who say they're both analogous enough, but from what I have read, this person who's acting, who works in a charity, is acting as a wakil. They're representing, they're not an employee of the state. So technically they don't qualify as amilina alayha. But in old times, someone who's working for the state to collect zakat, distribute zakat, they could take the salary from zakat. وَالْمُؤَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبُهُمْ, those people whose hearts are inclined towards Islam or need inclination towards Islam. This is a new Muslim who accepted Islam under adverse circumstances. Generally in Muslim or a group of Muslims that previously were fighting the Muslims. So they lost the battle, and then they eventually ended up accepting Islam, but there's still a little bit of hiqt, a little bit of animosity and beef that remains over. The Prophet ﷺ would give zakat to many of these people as a means to, smooth over the edges. Obviously never a bribe, but it's meant to be like a way to say we are all now brothers in Islam. Number 4. Number 5, وَالْمُؤَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبُهُمْ وَفِي الرِّقَابِ. Number 5 is those people who are enslaved. Also today could apply to someone who is wrongfully imprisoned. They are fir riqab, they are in captivity. They can be, zakat money can be used to free them. وَالْغَارِمِينَ, those who are in debt. Number 6. And this debt could be halal debt or haram debt. The condition for a haram debt is that you must give up your haram debt. In the sense that if a person has credit card loans and they're interest bearing, zakat can be used to pay off their balance. But the condition is you cut up your credit cards and you just use debit cards for now. Okay, that is the condition that's put, because you don't want a person using zakat or abusing zakat just to pay off their debts, and then they accrue more debts, especially if they're haram. Number 7 is وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, in the path of Allah. Probably the most contentious one, isn't it? But in the olden days, in the 4 madhahib, the definition of it is very specific. It is al-ghuza al-mutatawwi'in, the voluntary soldiers in the Muslim army. They would be paid soldiers. That's their job. That's their job. They're a soldier. But then there would be voluntary soldiers that would join the army to fight. Okay, not draft. Draft, everybody joins. Okay, but this is a volunteer person. Say, I want to join the army, not as a full-time professional, but just for the sake of some battle or the other, or some cause or the other. They would be paid from zakat. Their salary, whatever they left behind, their business, their jobs, they will get money from zakat because they're volunteering. Imam Ahmad adds to this people going for Hajj. But this is only Imam Ahmad, the only one who is the outlier here. He says because the Prophet ﷺ said to Aisha radiallahu anha that the Hajj is your jihad, meaning for the women. So it comes under fi sabilillah from that perspective. So he has the opinion that someone wants to go to Hajj and they don't have money, you can give them zakat money to send them to Hajj. Maybe today we might need it, huh? Given the prices of Hajj, subhanallah. But that's the classical definition, okay? In the modern times, the ulama have adapted it to be more expansive, to make it so that someone who's defending Islam is included in this category, or something that's defending Muslim identity is included in this category. So for example, the people who, because we cannot enlist voluntarily to fight for a Muslim army, okay, that's not possible for us. In fact, that will get us into a lot of trouble. But we have to defend Islam, yes, and particularly here. So anybody who's doing so would come under the category of fi sabilillah, or any organization, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَجَاهِدْهُمْ بِهِ جِهَادًا كَبِيرًا. Strive against these people with it, and the it is referring to the Quran. So that is telling you that you can defend Islam ideologically, you can defend Islam with your speech, with your content, with your words, and that is also a type of a jihad, a type of protection of the deen. Sheikh Salah al-Sawi and Amja, they extend it further and they say anything that's Muslim identity in the West would be included in this. Sheikh Qaradawi rahimahullah extends it even further and adds other items to it. This is the modern day adaptation of it. Okay, if you are asking my humble opinion on the matter, I will go as far as anything that's any cause that's defending Islam, NCCM, our brothers at Hikmah, I'm not sure if they take zakat or not, but they're defending Islam 100% without a doubt, fi sabilillah. Anything that's part of Muslim identity and there's not enough money to go around, maybe like a Islamic school or a masjid where there's no masjid in the city and property is extremely expensive, that's the furthest. But outside of that, if just LMM needs new carpet, there's no zakat. We cannot take zakat for that. Okay, if LMM needs to change the basketball nets, absolutely no zakat for that one. That's just sadaqah. Okay, so that is the fi sabilillah. And last is wabn sabil, the person who is a stranded traveler. Back in the day, someone who travels, was wealthy, got lost or got into trouble or things happen. They are detached from their money. That's ibn sabil. They are basically a stranded traveler. They can take zakat to get back home. Today, that generally doesn't exist because people usually have access to their money. This is the 8 categories. Now, specifically also about, say, a faqir. You found a faqir or you found a miskin. We're all masakin sometimes. And you're like, okay, here's a miskin, I want to give them zakat. Okay, there are some conditions for that particular category as well. Okay, that person cannot be from your inheritors nor your ancestor. Okay, so they cannot be in the family tree. If you imagine the family tree, and here is you, they cannot be above you in the family tree, directly above you. Your father, mother, grandfather, grandmother, you cannot give zakat to them. They cannot be directly below you in the family tree. Your child, grandchild, they can't be that either. Okay, that is because they are your responsibility, right? But horizontally in the family tree you can give. So brother, sister, uncle, aunt, cousin, etc. Right? You can give them zakat. And this is recommended because giving zakat to family is not only zakat, but it also is strengthening family ties. Okay? So that is the situation of per category. If you found a person who's in debt, they cannot be your immediate inheritor or your immediate ancestor, or actually not just immediate, any ancestor or any inheritor, and but they can be cousins, brothers, etc. Okay, that is the one situation. The other one, of course, also is the spouse. The husband can now give zakat to the wife because she is the responsibility to provide for her is on the shoulders of the man. There is a difference of opinion. Can the wife give zakat to her husband? And one of our teachers will always joke about this, and I'll repeat his joke, that if you're taking zakat from your wife, you are a miskin. Like, in every way, you are a miskin, okay? But the safe position here is, Allahu A'lam, to not do that, because generally household expenses and income and expenses are generally shared and whatnot, and it is firaran an al-khilaf or min al-khilaf, just to stay away from the difference of opinion. This is the basic summary of what is zakat recipients. Also, the family of the Prophet cannot receive zakat. The Hashimi, the descendants of Ali and Ja'far and Aqil, that's the family of the Prophet ﷺ, they cannot receive zakat. I said this once to a sheikh, with a sheikh in a lecture, and then even though I studied in Egypt, I never met these people. He was also from Egypt. He said, we actually have the poorest people that we know in our village are the Hashimis, Ali Rasulullah ﷺ, because they can never get zakat, and they are the poorest. So there was a fatwa given in their, in their hayy or in their town, in their neighborhood, that you can give zakat to them because these guys are extreme, like they're just completely, they're homeless and whatnot, and subhanallah. So there is some details there too, but that is the summary of the recipients of zakat. Wallahu a'lam.
And I know we have lots of questions and we'll get to them. Some of them have been answered, but we'll get to them inshallah. And we will take questions from the floor. I do want to say very lastly, in terms of zakat from a high level philosophical perspective, it's beautiful when you start understanding why Allah subhanahu, or why we think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the rules the way He did. I'll give you two examples and I'll stop talking. We'll get to the questions. One example is to think about assets, asset classes. In any place you go, there's three asset classes at a high level, either cash or debt or investments, equities. Those are the three high levels of assets when you're talking finance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took the middle asset class and basically threw it out. He said, you will not be able to profit from lending money. That's haram, that's riba. So He took that asset class off the table, figuratively. So as a Muslim, you're left with two asset classes. If you have cash, if you have wealth, you're going to have to either keep it in cash, keep it in investments, or a portion of both. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put a disincentive for you to put your money in cash. And if we're talking 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 a year, no big deal, because the amount is very, very small. But if you're wealthy and you could move, you could have an impact with your wealth, yeah, you don't want to sit on $1 million in cash for a year, because there's $25,000 that basically disappeared. So what are you forced to do, logically, is to pull your money out of cash. You can't go to debt. You're going to have to go to equities or investments. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically is motivating us to all put our money in investments. And when we do that correctly and soundly, what happens? Economies flourish. And the Canadian system, by the way, knows that too. That's why you get a tax break on capital gains and you don't on interest payments. Interest payments are completely subject to tax 100%. Capital gains, 50% are subject to tax. So they know that because they want the economy to move forward. Allah already put that system in place for us. But subhanAllah, when Mr. Mark Carney sets up the rules or whoever, we say, oh, that must be smart. But when Allah does, oh, this zakat is something old, we don't need to worry about it. A'udhu billah min shaitan rajim. Rabbil Alameen knows exactly how we'll flourish, and He wants you to become rich, but He wants you to become rich in the way that He measures richness. And that's one example of how zakat works. The one issue sometimes people come back with, they say, okay, if I have $1 million in cash, I have to pay $25,000 to poor people at the end of the year. But if I take that $1 million and buy a Popeyes or a pizza place or what have you, how much zakat do I pay? Zero. So in one case, you pay $25,000. In the other case, you pay zero. So most people run away from cash and look for other ways to reduce their zakat. And by the way, you get ajr in this. You get put into jail if you try to run away from paying taxes. That's not legal, don't do that. But if you try not to pay zakat, this is encouraged in Islam. But some people come back and say, hold on, okay, so you saved $25,000 because now you have a Popeyes, not a bank account with $1 million in it. What happens to the poor person, the miskeen, the guy who used to get zakat from his wife? He's not going to get $25,000, so he's going to be homeless. No. Why? Because if you're Fawaz and you have $1 million, I don't know if he does, but let's say, inshallah, he has $1 billion. But if he does and he wants to buy a Popeyes, he's not going to be working in the Popeyes in the day, I don't think. You'll be still cutting up people's brains and fixing their whatever. So what is he going to do with this Popeyes? It can't be empty. He's going to have to hire people to serve and to cook and to do all that business. Guess who's he's going to hire? He's going to hire the masakin that he would have paid 25,000 sadaqah or zakat. Now he's going to employ them in his store and pay them 25,000 or 30 or 50, depending on how well the business does. So in this setup, he doesn't have to pay zakat. He saves the 25,000. He hires a whole bunch of people that would have been sitting at home, and he is investing in a business that continues to make money. Win, win, win. Everybody wins. Everybody wins because Allah structured it this way. When you start thinking about zakat in this perspective, you realize that La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, and we're in good hands that Allah is setting up the system. So I'm going to quickly ask you questions, inshallah, and I'll hint to whether they've been answered or not. Many of them we've talked about before. The method you explained for calculating zakat on shares, how do we apply them for funds and ETFs when you have a lot of companies, not a single company?
Asr is at 5:15.
5:15, yeah.
Okay, so we have like 6 minutes.
So you have 30 seconds to answer.
So the
ETFs and mutual
ETFs,
funds.
so they're all generally will hold stocks within them. So the calculation would be a sum of like each of those individual equities in each of the individual stocks, the value of it times how much that is proportionate to the ETF, the sum of that. That's hard to do. That's a lot of work. So you can take that 35% measure, that percentage, and just apply it. You can also, I'm not sure if you've seen this or not, but Zoya, there's an app called Zoya.
Yes.
How many of you have heard of Zoya, the app?
Yeah.
A few of you have. Okay, really good. This is actually a really nice, innovative app. They've created a way for you to screen the eligibility of compliance of stocks, if it's Sharia compliant or not. And they also have a Zakat calculator. And what you can do is you can actually, if you get this paid subscription, which is like $50 a year, you connect it to your broker, your brokerage account, and it will tell you in your brokerage account the holdings you have and the cash you have, what is the zakat for it, ETFs, stocks, everything included. So it's a really, really good, like that's a good $50 investment, because you get that, you open your app and right away it tells you what's your zakat. I would actually encourage you to do that. If you don't want to do that, you don't want to support that app from that perspective, they have a zakat calculator for stocks. So you can enter symbols and it will tell you exactly for ETFs and mutual funds as well how much zakat is due.
Jazakallah khair. Second question would be, my wife has $5,000 in gold. She wears part of it, but not the other part. How do you pay zakat on that?
Gold and silver, zakat on jewelry, the position of the Hanafi school is you pay zakat on it irrespective. It doesn't matter whether you wear it or not. The others say if the jewelry is worn habitually, there's no zakat on it, because it's like the clothes of the women, and the clothes, there's no zakat on it. So whichever position you follow, you can pick that and pay zakat accordingly on the value of the gold and the value of the silver, not the precious stones and whatnot, diamonds, etc., all exempt.
What is the nisab amount in Canada?
85 grams of gold. So the IOFI standard is a gold standard, right? Because nisab in silver is like a few $100. Yeah, $1,100. So no one is rich when they have 1,100, right? You're probably the miskin who needs zakat. The gold standard is 85 grams, which is I think 11,000 something, 11,500 or change. So that is the gold nisab.
Is it okay to have a parent calculate zakat for me?
Sure.
Yeah. It's fair to say that you're responsible for it. So if I ask my dad to do it for me, because he's an accountant, I'm still responsible. So I got to make sure that my dad knows what they're doing, because ultimately it's my neck. But obviously getting a parent, getting an accountant, getting an advisor to help you with calculating zakat, if you trust them, inshallah, the burden goes off of your shoulder. If I own 120,000 equities, in equity on student rental, is zakat due on that amount? If I own 120 in equity on student rental.
Property, right?
Yeah, so rental property.
So rental property, the zakat is on the unexpended income, not the value of the property, right? So it's on the income that you have saved over the course of the year, and not the value of the property itself.
Sahih. If I have 2 rental properties with mortgages, and all the rental income goes towards paying them off, is zakat required in this case?
There's a bigger problem with that question.
Maybe Sharia compliant mortgage. We don't know.
Okay, fair. But yeah, no, if there is no, again, the idea is unexpended income. Whatever you have made from that property and have stored it or saved it for the year, zakat is due on that. If nothing is left, alhamdulillah.
I have significant student loans from professional school, but also have gold that was gifted from my wedding. Is the debt deducted from my zakat requirement, assuming
Yes.
gold has to be paid?
Yes, so the debt, you can take the portion of the principal that a person is paying over the course of years and take that principal, multiply by 12, that's a person's yearly debt obligation, okay? So if someone is paying $1,000 a month, say in student loans, 500 is principal, they would take 12 times 5, that's 600. That's the, 6,000, excuse me. That's the amount they could say, I don't have 6,000 from all the assets that I have. So they can deduct that, and that's a fair thing. Gold itself, you have to pay zakat on gold if the gold is just for storage purposes. If it's gold that you're wearing, then you can follow the position of the Shafi'i and the Hanabila and the Malikiya and not pay zakat on it. The idea of, by the way, of zakat in the older times was that you would literally take a piece of that asset and give it in zakat. So you have 25 camels, you will give one of them away in zakat. Okay? If you have crops, you would take 10% of it and literally give that 10% crop in zakat. And gold, the idea was that you would, like chip off a piece or cut off a little bit of the piece and give that as zakat. That was the original intent. Okay, so now jewelry, you can't really do that. So you have to either say, I'll value it as cash and give zakat on it as cash, or just wear it from time to time.
Excellent. If I'm actively trading stocks and equities, and the equities are working capital, do I have to pay zakat on that? Maybe I'll take that one very quickly.
Yes, please.
If you are a mudarib, i.e. you're trading back and forth, you don't do the short-term, long-term, you pay zakat on the entire amount because the commodity you're dealing with is actually the stocks that you're using. So you take the full value of that portfolio times 2.5%, and that's what you would pay zakat on. There's a question about...
Any question on the floor? We should do something.
Yeah. Does anybody have questions?
Sorry. A couple of minutes and just ask on the floor. What do you think?
Inshallah. Do you guys have any questions?
Yes, Professor.
Sir. Yes, tfadl. Oh, your 10 questions we can't answer in the next minute, but stick around after and I'll sit with you, inshallah. Yes, Muhammad.
You mentioned about the total size of the portfolio.
Naam.
And 2.5% of that should pay zakat.
If you are trading, actively trading, yes, 2.5% of that.
What about a portion of it, like the capital gains or the profit that you made from that portion of that portfolio?
So there's a number of opinions on how you calculate zakat. The first one is you mark to market, i.e. even if it's long-term, you pay 2.5%. The second opinion is you treat it like land, like Sheikhna said, you pay 10% on the dividend that comes out of it. I personally find that problematic for reasons I discussed last week. I'm happy to do one-on-one later. The third opinion is that you only pay on the short-term assets. But that requires you to be a long-term investor. If you're a short-term day trader, week trader, that introduces other problems we're not going to talk about now. But you're a mudarib, and then it's the entire full market value at the time of zakat that is outstanding, that is calculated. Makes sense? Any other questions from the floor?
Did you have a question?
No. No. Last question, and then we'll stop, inshallah, because we don't want to hold prayer. And I fear Sheikh Adnan when he yells at me. Haram, he doesn't yell. Kind of, but he may be listening to me in the back. Is zakat al-fitr different in terms of eligibility requirements? Do you want to take that on?
Zakat al-Fitr is a completely different category. It's not Zakat al-Mal. Zakat al-Mal is Zakat al-Mal. Zakat al-Fitr is a completely separate category. It doesn't have it's more like Sadaqah in the sense that it's applied without the constraint of saving, okay? And it's given not with the constraints of like those 8 categories. And generally it's given to people who don't have enough to celebrate Eid. That's the intent of Zakat al-Fitr. And originally it was supposed to be food. It's given to people who didn't have food on Eid, so they can have a nice Eid as well, inshallah.
I'm going to ask one thing before we close.
Yes.
Do you have time to come back after Asr, or you have to go?
Yeah, sure.
So we'll be here, inshallah, after Asr. If there's